Welcome back to Beyond Well. I'm Sheila Hamilton, and today we're talking with Jeannie Bass, who's a peer specialist at a state hospital and also on the Hearing Voices Network Board of Directors. Hi, Jeannie. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, Sheila. Thanks for having me.
So I'm first of all curious about your work at the state hospital. You're dealing with people who are in the height of a mental health crisis at the time of a COVID-19 crisis. What is the combination of those two things been like?
Well, it's been really interesting. The kind of nature of my work, I can't delve too much into it, but I can tell you, I can speak generally about
love that.
how COVID-19 has affecting some of the voice hearers that I know, as well as myself, because I'm a voice hearer. I think that, for the general population in the world, this, their world has been turned upside down, and they thought nothing like this could ever happen. And for a lot of voice hearers, not everyone, we've been hearing about pandemics that maybe we were causing, or were going to be caused if we didn't do something, the voices told us to do. And so basically, it's like your worst nightmare come true. So I've been supporting a lot of people that, some of the people I support have done a lot of work with their voices to get to a point where, okay, this is you're telling me a pandemic's going to happen. This is like a metaphor for something else.
Right.
Now here we are. And, just like the world wearing masks, that can be really scary for voices, because voices have their own fears, their own personalities. I know for myself at my job, when we all started wearing masks, required.
Yeah.
I remember sitting in a group. It was on beliefs, aka delusions. And I was looking at my co-facilitator, who is a sweetheart, and I've seen, thousands of times, only without a mask. And I'm just staring at her, and my voices are telling me she's evil, and look at her eyes, and
Oh my
the whole thing played out. So I think that I know this is a lot of stress on voice hearers in particular, and it's a really important time to reach out and get support from each other.
You just so humanized this really critical point, which is this is a living nightmare for people in the best mental health.
Right.
It's like they're in your wildest imagination. You can't imagine vacant cities and people in masks and pandemics, and here it is, the very nature of what people's nightmares and their voices are is now come true. And you just humanized it so beautifully, Jeannie. I just thank you for that, because it really struck me oh my gosh, I've heard it said sometimes in other cultures that people who hear voices are kind of the truth tellers and the shamans, and maybe maybe they have had some insight that other people lacked.
Yeah, I mean, even the way people are trying to discern what the media is saying. A friend of mine recently, a week ago, said to me, I don't know what's real and what's not real when I watch the news, I read the newspaper, I look at Apple, News. I have no idea what to believe. And I was I just looked at him and I was welcome to my world,
Oh my
and where as a voice hearer, you have to kind of, even as someone who's been working with my voices and, living with voices, as we say, for, almost a decade in a relationship where there's more balance, I still have to kind of be a guard at the palace gate, and kind of okay, what is this information that my voices are saying? What is this, how does this relate to consensus reality?
Yeah, right.
So people are seeing kind of what it's like to not know, not have a firm sense of, okay, this is concretely what's happening right now.
Wow. And what is consensus reality anymore, right?
Right.
Well, you were one of the first co-facilitators of a Hearing Voices group online, and that was way before the pandemic, along with Caroline Matzel-Carlson. So tell us about the process of starting that HVN online group.
Yeah, so I was one of the co-founders. So the board had talked a lot about getting online groups for quite a while, because I've been on the board for about 5 years, and it just hadn't gotten off the ground. And then it just reached a point where we were seeing more and more people needing support, and there just not being enough groups out in the community. So Caroline and I talked, and we were like, let's just make this happen, you know.
Wow.
And,
So cool.
yeah, we just like,
you're my hero, Jeannie.
oh, thank you. We, used the Western Mass RLC Zoom account. We just got it going, and people started coming. And when it started, it was bi-weekly, and then there was a need for it to be weekly. And now there's actually, with the pandemic, I mean, there's groups every single night of the week on, from that online group. But there's also a lot of the local groups, like community groups, have now moved online, like in New York, the Bay Area, different parts across the country. I know the Pacific Rim, HVN has groups every night online. So there definitely are groups available for people. And I think this is a really important time to reach out to the larger Hearing Voices community and to really connect with each other, because even if you go to a group and you just, want out of isolation and see other humans or talk to people about anything. I mean, one of our freedoms in Hearing Voices Network is that when you come to our spaces, you don't have to talk about just voices, visions, and, paranoia and stuff. You can talk about the freedom to talk about anything you want. So it's really an opportunity to connect.
I'm so thrilled, and I've heard other people in the healthcare world talk about the potential silver lining of this is that there actually might be more access, even if it is remote access. It will be a way for people who were personally truly underserved, truly undervalued to be able to connect, and that sounds like what's going on with you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Carolyn Carlton has done, she's on the board of directors too, and she's also the training director for Hearing Voices Network with the Western Mass RLC. And she has done such an amazing job with just supporting people all over the country to move their groups online. She's done some educational web-based workshops on how to use Zoom to get your group online. I actually just saw before I got on the podcast that they put on the Hearing Voices Network USA .org website a recording of one of those workshops. So if anyone's listening and interested in moving, Hearing Voices Network or any type of group or community meeting into an online platform, she does a really great job with walking you through that.
That's so cool. Tell me a little bit about how far you've come in being able to have balance and a holistic view of yourself from when you first started Hearing Voices.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started Hearing Voices, I was a very different person. I now work for the public mental health system, and I used to receive services from the public mental health system. There was, I would just hear my voices and have, all these other really life-altering experiences with mood and stuff. But there was people to handle my money, people to drive me around. It was, I was kind of a shell of a human being. No one really cared about what I wanted. And it was just sort of me and my voices against the world. And I was very much into whatever they told me to do, I would do. At one point there were voices telling me not to think, and I literally practiced not thinking. I would filter all thoughts, all conversations through them. They would tell me exactly what to think, what to feel. But it was just, I had a lot of big experiences, a lot of extreme things happen. I had a big ending on the Tobin Bridge where I was walking around and ended up in a hospital for 8 months. So I've come a long way, and honestly, finding Hearing Voices Network was the absolute pinnacle of when I found the network online, and I hadn't been on a computer in a couple years, and I sat down and I was like, what do I want to look up? And I was like, people who hear voices and aren't crazy. People who hear voices.
Wow.
And don't want them
Incredible. What a branch to your own life, really.
Right.
Even in that crisis, you wanted to save your own life. That's so beautiful.
Yeah. And I just couldn't believe there was people all over the world that were hearing voices, and they, I didn't have really a full life then, but they had these full, rich lives. And I was like, maybe it's possible. And it definitely is. And so much has happened in the United States just in the last 5 or 6 years. We hosted the World Hearing Voices Congress in Boston. It was the first time on U.S. soil. We had almost 500 people here, voice hearers, clinicians, all different people from all walks of life.
Oh, Jeannie, I'm so moved by our conversation today, and I have the benefit of video, so it's really helpful. But it's. I think there's always this misconception that people who hear voices are walking around homeless and in dire circumstances, and to see someone so beautiful and so filled with optimism and light has just been really wonderful. Just because you're shattering a lot of stereotypes of what other people want to believe about people with serious mental illness. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think the reason a lot of people walk around like that, like I used to, is because no one tells them that they have the power to work with their own voices, their own experiences, that they have the right to work with their voices, that they have the right to set limits and boundaries with voices, that they have the right to question if a voice tells them to do something wild, that there are actual strategies for getting through this stuff, and for actually learning to really let it help you with your life. There's voices that go from being really distressing and really like torturous to people to then becoming like guides or humor, to kind of lighten their day.
So awesome. That is so wonderful. Jeannie, thanks again for all of your work. Again, Jeannie Bass is on the board of directors of Hearing Voices Network, and she also works as a peer specialist at a psych hospital in Massachusetts. Please continue the great work, Jeannie.
Thanks so much, Sheila.